Well, good afternoon. Happy November. As I was saying, it's unbelievable how fast it came. This is Andrea Amico, and I am super excited about today because we're going to have as a guest Michelle Bray. She's the Chief Privacy Officer of CAR Global. And I got to know Michelle over the last year or two, and she's an absolutely fantastic person. And I think that this is going to be a fantastic session. Before we get there, let's go through the usual mechanics. So let's read the antitrust statement. As participants in this meeting, we need to be mindful of the constraints of antitrust law. There should be no discussion of agreements or concerted action that may restrain competition. This prohibition includes the exchange of information concerning individual prices, rates, coverages, market practices, claim settlement practices, or any other competitive aspect of an individual company's operation. Each participant is obligated to speak up immediately for the purpose of preventing any discussion falling outside these bounds. And good news is that we have a bunch of lawyers on the line, so I'm sure that we're going to be sticking to these guidelines as we always do. As a reminder, if you hear something that you think is falling outside or is getting even close to these guidelines, please unmute yourself and say, hey, hold on a second, let's stop the conversation here, and then we'll redirect the conversation as appropriate. With that said, I am eager to give the floor very soon to Michelle. Michelle, I'm sure you're going to do the safe harbor. None of these conversations is going to consider legal advice. So please, everybody, seek your own advice. But of course, Michelle is an amazing lawyer. She actually has received many awards during her practice. She is originally an IP lawyer and then expanded her purview over privacy. And as I said, she's the Chief Privacy Officer of CAR Global. I'm sure Michelle is going to tell us soon what a Chief Privacy Officer is and what a Chief Privacy Officer does and why CAR Global decided to have one. But in the meantime, again, I wanted to point out that Michelle is not only really good at her job, I had the pleasure of working with her, but she's also a person that deeply cares about making the world a better place. She's very involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's just extremely thoughtful about dynamics within the industry and how to better those dynamics and drive ethical behavior within the players that are at work. She's recently created Privacy Pam, which I'm sure she's going to be telling us about. I think it's the second cousin once removed of Safety Sam that everybody's very familiar with. Probably not everybody knows about Privacy Pam, and so I'm sure that she's going to tell us about it. Michelle, with that, I'll give you the floor. You're in charge.
Andrea, thank you so much. And thank you for including me in this session today. I'm really excited to be here and to meet with all of you. Andrea, I want to also say a few words about you. You were so kind and gracious in my bio, but I also want to share that one of the reasons I think that we sort of organically started working together is that you are also so engaged by this world of privacy and so committed to, good data principles, privacy principles, and, built this entire product around it, which we are now using and is helping a process that we started many years ago for our customers in terms of clearing personal information out of the vehicle. And now we have this great app that makes that much easier. So thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Before we dive into the program, and Andrea, if it's okay in a minute, I am going to share my screen. I've got a couple of talking points that we can share visually. But before I do that, I want to introduce a very special colleague. I know, Andrea, you have met her, but my dear colleague, Crystal Bell, is our current OR fellow, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that fellowship. But one of the reasons that she's on here is she's making sure that all of our technology works today. And she's also been a pivotal help to me in building out the third and fourth modules of our Privacy Pam program. And she tries to convince me every day that she's not creative, that she has more of that right brain working or left brain working. But I'm absolutely convinced that her right and left brain are equally dominant. So Crystal, if you wouldn't mind just saying hello, I wanted to thank you for everything you did to help this presentation as well as the training modules.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate it. Andrea, thank you so much for having us. Yes, I'm Crystal Bell. My civil engineering background comes out when I don't necessarily think I'm equipped to write scripts and have this vision for what the amazing Privacy Pam videos have been and will continue to be. So again, Michelle, thank you for bringing me on. But essentially this OR fellowship is kind of what brought me to this place. You have this professional development within tech industries, especially in Indianapolis, although I think it'd be a great program around the country, honestly. But we are young people graduated from college who are really ready to have a great career trajectory, especially in the tech field. And so this collision with Car Global was absolutely perfect. And although I'm working on something very creative, I get to use all of those skills that I've kind of built over the years. And so again, thank you for having us, Andrea. Michelle, thank you. And I'll go ahead and play the video a little later. So thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here.
Share one really funny story, Andrea. When I first introduced Crystal to Andrea, he thought that she was Privacy Pam personified. And it's actually, they do strike an uncanny resemblance, but I actually created her at the end of 2019, but well before I met Crystal. So you might see the resemblance, but they're both rock stars. Okay, so I'm gonna try to share my screen here and see if we can get the PowerPoint up. So you may need to let me know what you're seeing here. Do you see a PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. From beginning. Okay. Does that look right, Crystal?
I see two boxes.
Okay.
We see exactly what you see on your screen.
Better?
So we also see, yeah,
Perfect.
Okay. All right, so this is just kind of privacy at a high level, but focusing on the modern age. So privacy in a connected world. And again, if we look through the lens of our community, we are thinking about vehicles as connected devices, right? Mobile devices, little computers on wheels. So that's kind of the high level backdrop for the discussion today. We're gonna go through 7 different areas here, the 7th being the Q&A. So Crystal, keep me on time. And if if I'm running over, just stop me so that we have an opportunity for folks to ask questions and for us to have a dialogue. I've introduced Crystal. She's also gonna show a little bit of the clip. She put together kind of a reel of some of the different trainings. So it's just about 1.5 minutes. So we'll share that with you so you can get a sense of what that looks like. We're going to explain the why. Why are we talking about this? Why have a privacy program with all the priorities and the substance of what we have to do, particularly post-COVID, in the environments that we're living and working in? Why do we need this? And we're going to talk about the different types of data. Just keep in mind, privacy focuses on personal information, right? But there are all other kinds of data elements that are relevant to confidentiality and to businesses, employees. So we want to take a look at those categories and classifications of data, as well as the types of privacy. So privacy goes way back. So we're talking a lot about it now because we live in a connected world and we don't have very many geographic barriers anymore, but privacy goes way back, and we'll kind of take a look at that progression throughout the decades and actually go back even more than 100 years there. And then we'll talk about priorities, because we certainly cannot boil the ocean. There's always sort of this tension between law, regulation, technology. How do you keep up, and how do you prioritize, and how do you budget around that? And then finally, we'll just kind of lay it out there. What's next? What's coming next? If you look at, as we study kind of the decades and where technology has taken us and the role of privacy within that, what in the world is coming next? So we want to be prepared for that. So this is kind of what the course or the framework of our dialogue today. Okay, so why do we have a privacy program? Why are we, making this a matter of strategic importance? There are 3, I think, important legs of the stool, if you will. The first being we have to create a privacy culture that's really critical to the program itself. And the reason for that is it doesn't come easily, or it's not sort of second nature to think about these issues and understand them. But if we look at the statistics, it isn't as much the hackers in the basement or the state threat actors that are causing the data breaches that we all read about and see on television today, it's human error. Most of the time, it's human error, sometimes malicious insiders, but we need to create a culture within our organizations where everybody has skin in the game, everybody's focused on it. It's not just the most senior leadership, it's not just the lawyers. We need marketing involved, we need IT operations involved, HR, everybody's got to work together. So this is a very collaborative task force. This is a really important, I think, endeavor for the entire organization, from the CEO all the way through to the mail clerks and the folks in the lot. So we have to be talking about it. We need to see, notice it, recognize it when you see it, got to get that out in the culture. The second one is driving business innovation and trust. So again, there's a correlation between looking at, a good and sort of responsible data governance program and just good privacy, right? So we want to do the right thing by the data that we hold and that we secure and that we process for our customers, because there used to be this argument, what runs the world? Is it love or is it money? And people are on two sides. A lot of people say love runs the world. A lot of people say it's money. It's money is what runs the world. Today, it's actually data. There's a third category. Data is running the world, and data is actually the equivalent to business, right? So if that's true, and I think we probably all agree at this point in time it is true, we need to make sure that there's transparency. So I talk about this a lot, about this holy trinity. You have to have good privacy. You can't have good privacy without security, and you need to have transparency. So privacy, security, transparency. Do the right thing by your business, by your customers, by your employees, and don't leave anything out, right? Let's make sure that it works and that we have kind of the data, no pun intended, to back that up. So the data piece, that becomes the backing up, if you will, or making sure it works. That becomes really important with the third point of the privacy program, which is reducing regulatory risk. And, I don't have to tell this group because you're all sort of in that space already. We have laws going back, decades and decades, and kind of this patchwork of federal, international, state regulation and laws. But even more so, at least in the United States, we saw last year that the Department of Justice came out and said, if we're going to measure your compliance programs based on how you design them, are they designed well? Are they adequately resourced, right? Do you have enough resources devoted to this? And third, it's essentially that, do they work? Is the program working? And you better have data to show that, in fact, it does work. And so there are a lot of different kind of metrics that go into that. And, the idea of having a program or a training and awareness program that is collaborative, interactive, engaging, measures results. So one thing, you won't see this today, but one thing that is a part of our Privacy Pam modules is the testing component. So there are multiple choice questions and answers along the way. And so that part where you're having the user engaged in the compliance program is really critical as well, and increasingly so from a regulatory perspective. So those are kind of the three legs of the stool, and that's why we're doing it. So now if we take a look at the data, we talked about different classes of data, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at a weird thing on my screen. So are you just seeing the slide? Hopefully you just see the slide. Okay, all right, I've got another window. I'm just gonna move this over a little bit. Okay, so data classification types. Again, there's no privacy without security. We want transparency. Privacy itself is concerned with the sensitive personal information. I think we need someone to mute. Thank you. But there's other categories. So the public data elements that are in the public, there's really no law and regulation around that. That's what you can see, what you can touch, what's out there. And that's not regulated as heavily, right? If we look at the spectrum. And then confidential information, that might be data about a company, your customer, proprietary information for your own company that may not have personal data elements as part of it. It might, but it might not. It might just be something secret saucy that you want to protect and should be protected. And in fact, your customers have obligated you to protect that under contract. So these are the various data classification types. What we're discussing today and what would be the subject of a privacy program is that PII, or personal information. And we're actually going to get into the various data elements in the next slide. But before we do that, Crystal, can I switch over to you and could you share just a little bit of our module itself, which is a little bit of a combination of some of the different training modules.
Go ahead and share. And give me 1 second.
Crystal, do I need to stop sharing first?
Yes, please, if you can. That'd be great.
I'm gonna get on here. Okay, see if that works.
Fantastic.
Make protecting privacy a priority.
Autopilot engaged. I'm ready for some clarification between privacy and data security.
So, privacy refers specifically to the protection of personally identifiable information, sometimes referred to as just personal information or PI.
Now, how about data security?
Well, data security refers to the protection of all data from unauthorized access, use, alteration, or theft. This involves policies, processes, security controls, applications and techniques for securing data. One of my favorite ways to look at the relationship between data security and privacy is to think of a house. Data security ensures that the doors to the house are locked securely at night. Privacy ensures that the shades are drawn so that the people inside have their privacy. Protecting the privacy of PI is not only required by law and regulation, it is expected by customers, consumers, employees, and trusted third parties. It's just good business. We want to arm everyone in our organisation with awareness and training tools to help battle against cyber pirates and data hackers.
Oh, those guys are the worst.
Make protecting privacy a priority.
Thank you.
Here we go.
Now, can you still see mine, or I guess I need to share again? Is that right?
Yes, exactly.
Find it. Bear with me, guys. I'm an old dinosaur, so let's see here. Is it up?
Not quite.
Not yet.
I think if you share through Zoom.
Okay, I'm sorry, bear with me here. Yeah, for some reason, Crystal, I might need to. Okay, I think I've got it. Hold on. I've got Zoom up, but I can't find that. Thank you. Oh. It's mad at you. Bear with us, guys. Am I still on Zoom? No. There we go.
We're on your browser right now.
Yeah, we can see the browser.
Oh, that's good. Okay, we're getting there, guys. I might have exited the PowerPoint.
No, it's just running slowly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, we can see the PowerPoint.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. I told you, you're awesome. She's awesome. Okay, thank you. We're good? Oh, you want to do the view with it? There we go. Okay. Awesome. How are we doing now?
Perfection.
Wonderful. Okay. So I hope you enjoyed that clip. I thought Crystal did a great job kind of digesting a lot of the different things. And you were talking about Safety Sam earlier. We think it's kind of like the equivalent of, protecting, the safety that it is a hallmark, right, of our company. We want to, in the industry, to protect safety in the lane. And we really think that in the same way Safety Sam has been able to communicate that and have that become second nature to all of us, we'd like Privacy Pam to do the same thing for data in the cyberspace. So that's kind of our focus with her. And I didn't mention this earlier, but that is how she got her name. So it was intended to rhyme with Safety Sam. So that's kind of fun as well. So, okay, so again, we're talking about the personal information. That is the subject matter of privacy as opposed to some of those other data elements. And so this slide is intended to share the kinds of data elements that we're referring to. And if you look at the data elements on the left of the slide, you'll see data elements that are pretty recognizable to you as being personal information, right? Things like social security numbers, driver's license numbers. If you have a credit card and someone's password, that looks and feels like personal information. What we're seeing now, though, is this more of a GDPR-esque type of definition of personal information, which is anything that can be linked back to an individual. And this is where we get into kind of a more tender or sensitive space in the vehicle remarketing industry, because even under California's law now, the VIN can be personal information, which we wouldn't have thought of that before. We wouldn't think a VIN would even be personal information. So if you look at what's highlighted in red there to the right of the screen, information, anything that can be linked to a consumer, that's considered PI under most laws now. Biometric information, we talked about it at the end of this, what comes next. Pay attention to this. Biometric data, it is a blessing and a curse. It is one of the best ways to secure data. And yet, if something goes wrong, it can be one of the most damaging. And it's also an area that I think will be highly regulated because of what's happening in terms of fairness/unfairness. So what we're seeing is that some of the tools in this space are not being evenly applied. They're being used in a way that in some cases discriminates against Black and brown people. In other words, the facial recognition isn't recognizing the person. That can lead to even very, injurious things. So car accidents, there are a lot of cases coming up now in this space. So pay attention to that. So again, it's a really great tool. There's a lot of innovation in that space, but a lot of regulation will either come soon or follow. So pay attention there. Usernames and passwords, geolocation data, that's another one that's really relevant to our industry. We track cars for inventory purposes. We want to make sure we can very quickly get the buyers and sellers their vehicles and pinpoint where they are on the lot, those kind of things. But, we also might want to make sure that our drivers, our inspectors are showing up in the right place. And so are we tracking their phones? Are we actually tracking a person, an employee, a contractor? There are a lot of laws and regulations about what can and can't happen and what needs to be shared, right? Or do we need to disclose to the person that we're going to follow you on this device while you're working during this period, this time frame, but we're not going to, watch you go wherever you're going after 7 o'clock at night. So those kind of things are very relevant right now to employers. And again, kind of the subject matter of ripe legislation. So take a look at that. And of course, IP addresses, the computer, the devices themselves can pinpoint a person. So this is a really important, I think, area to kind of pay attention to moving forward. Okay, the next series of slides, I'm going to go through really quickly because, again, this group, I think, is very familiar with the statutes and the policies that are referenced here. But the approach is to kind of show that, again, going back to as early as like 1890, when this, Harvard Law Review article said, privacy, we can't really tell you what it is. We just know it's the right to be let alone. Everybody knows it, right? We just want to be let alone. And so then you see the census coming out in the early 1900s, Freedom of Information Act. This patchwork starts, and it starts quite a long time ago. If we look at, then in terms of the business world, we see things happening like non-disclosure agreements, consumer borrowing, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. In the early days of technology, back, I guess, during the commercial explosion of the internet, in the 90s, and I go back that far, so I remember these days, the wild, wild west, you do see things happening to facilitate, direct marketing to consumers. And so things come out like the telephone sales rule, TCPA, as the technology advances and people are able to text, the TCPA becomes much more meaningful, right? Because we have these wildly expensive class actions. Everyone knows about HIPAA, Gramm-Leach-Bliley. This is, these are table stakes. So we still put these statutes from the early 90s in the category of traditional privacy because we, believe it or not, go back that far. Then we get into kind of the internet privacy, the true wild, wild west, what they might refer to as Web 1.0, where there's this emphasis on a one-way street. So you have companies publishing, you have companies putting information out, but at that point, there's no interaction, right? There's no social media yet. There's no way really to interact or to answer back. It's just websites are showing up. And so Europe, once again, very, early on said, we have to regulate this. It is worth mentioning at this point that Europe takes a very different approach than the US, where the US said, you can do anything you want until someone tells you to stop, what we would refer to as an opt-out approach here in the United States. Europe said, you can't do that unless you have express consent. So this opt-in approach and this idea that privacy really is a fundamental human right. And so they came out even before GDPR, way back in the 90s with the Data Protection Directive. It wasn't harmonized throughout all the member countries, but there was a basic framework even back in the 90s to say, you're going to conduct yourselves, companies, a certain way before you take all this data from consumers and use it in different ways. And so this is, the early days, again, of the internet. We also see quite a bit of self-regulation, emails starting to come out. And so we see things like CAN-SPAM and the DMA in their privacy principles. They were at that point asking companies to designate privacy liaisons or privacy champions, that person that would actually be the privacy point person for the company. And I did that even back in the mid 90s. So that goes way back as well, this idea of having kind of a chief privacy officer or a privacy liaison at companies. If we move into Web 2.0 and social media frenzy, this is when everybody becomes a publisher and there's this interactive sharing where you can read and write. And again, the technology is a big enabler there. We see, that Illinois comes out with the Biometric Privacy Act. We have some other states that are following there as well. Bring your own device becomes kind of a big deal, right? Because people are able to do things on their own phones. Behavioral tracking, because again, you can track people through those devices. So we see a lot of this coming out in addition to more self-regulation, which, it continues to be embraced. Moving quickly to Web 3.0, where things are becoming much more personal. We see voices coming to life. We see robotics making decisions. We start to see some big data. And a lot of individuals are connecting at the edge, if you will. So we see lots of connected technologies and, refrigerators and Alexa gadgets. And now you can just tell your gadget to do what you want it to do. And so again, the law follows, the regulations follow. If you take a look at the Auto Alliance, I think the Automakers Alliance and the Global Automakers Guidelines, that those groups kind of came together as one last year. It's, I think, now the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, but they pretty early on, back in 2014, came out with these fair information principles and agreed upon what would be transparency, what would be the right way to conduct handling the vehicle data that runs through the car. So they recognized early on that cars were changing and that there was a lot of data flowing through the vehicles. And I think they updated that, I want to say in 2018. So that's out there to take a look at. And I think that, again, good on the industry for being proactive about it. I won't read all of the rest of them. You're familiar with GDPR, CCPA. I guess I will point out one that we don't yet have a federal privacy legislation. I think that's to come. I know they're very busy. It sort of comes up all the time, but they can't get along about anything these days. So we'll see if they're able to actually pull together some work product on that. But the other thing before we move to the next slide to kind of keep on your radar again for what's next and what's to come, these data localization laws are really important. So the idea that if you, as a global company, you're increasing your global footprint and you've got now employees, contractors in different countries. Some of these countries are now requiring that the data be kept on servers there in those countries. And so that again brings about a whole host of legal and compliance issues with different requirements there. So just keep that on your radar screen as well. Okay, so we are now at what's next. And I hesitated a little bit to share this slide because there's a particular company that is the subject of the criticism here. But I think it's really, really important that we focus on, again, fixing the data privacy issues. There's a whole lot, we could spend hours and days talking about this. Even with the most proactive program, there's a sort of a continuum. There's continuous improvement. We're always vigilant. We always have to tweak, turn, and make changes, but we are at a fork in the road at this point in time, from a business perspective, from a law and regulation perspective. And so my advice would be to embrace it, do the right thing, pull together your collaborative task force and make those changes and be excited about it. So in other words, forge straight ahead and do not go to the right, do not take the Mark Zuckerberg approach, because I think sort of burying our heads in the sand will end up, creating more legal trouble, more, issues with your customers, with consumers. It just makes good business sense, I think, to move ahead and make privacy a part of your organization. And I just have a couple more slides to kind of bolster that point to show some of the practical things that we can do. So if you take a look at this slide, it's referencing the notices privacy by design. So again, not sort of acting out of fear because, oh no, we have to make sure that we check these boxes and can show the regulators that we're following the laws. It is about the business. It's about transparency and making sure that you're working early on, particularly in technology space. And if you have a global footprint, working with your folks with product engineering, IT, again, business, HR, everybody to kind of say, does data touch this? Do we need to map this out? Which way is the data flowing? Where is it coming in? Where's it going out? How long do we keep it? Do we need to delete it after a certain amount of time? And how do we harmonize all these things? So to kind of pull that task force together and say, we're going to build this out by design. And so you might hear that term quite a bit, privacy by design, or there's also this concept of privacy by default. So that as data, again, data being the business, data is driving everything. Early on, we're going to sort of look at the value of that data, the flow of that data, and make sure that it's safe and secure. And if it involves personal information, that we're going to protect it. So that's really critical. From our perspective, for 21, I just shared a few highlights here of our priorities. Again, it can be really overwhelming. People talk about whack-a-mole and how many, how could you ever keep up with all these privacy laws and regulations? And even for, those of us who have been in this space for, well over a decade, it's a lot to keep up with. It changes quite a bit. And it's expensive. You've got to, kind of rally your resources and be smart about it and try to make sure that, you're balancing good privacy with really tight security. So work hand in hand with your office of the CISO, with your data security professionals. And so, at least from our perspective, we've kind of bifurcated it, or I guess I would say we work hand in hand to say, we've got a privacy strategy and a privacy program, and we walked hand in hand with our data security and IT ops professionals, because again, we want to build it into the infrastructure and have that, the operations people on board from the beginning so that we don't have to rip it out later. So these are kind of the areas for this year that we focused on. Privacy policies and notices, there's a technical difference there. Most people look at privacy notices on websites and they call them privacy policies. So they're kind of used interchangeably, but the policies technically are within your organization. How do you treat the data of your employees and your professionals that are, internal to you? And then the notices are a one-way notice, an external disclosure to customers, to website visitors, to mobile device users to say, this is how this is what we're collecting from you, and this is what we do with it. and the rights that you have about that. You know, do you have a right to delete it, ask us to delete it? Do you have a right to move it somewhere? Those kind of things. Website information, the same thing where you have like registration pages and you're taking data in on the various websites. That's really important for us. And then also I should mention reconciling non-electronic processes. So you might have things where you're still taking data in through PDFs or offline paper processes, but you're merging that into some kind of an electronic database. So don't ever forget that there is data that is still kept on paper and that needs, you know, that would also fall within the umbrella of the regulatory and legal landscapes for privacy. Employee training, again, we have our Privacy Pam, just to highlight again that, you know, the regulators are looking at, you know, it not a check the box. It's not okay to say, okay, we have a privacy protection program and we've written it up and, you know, you can find it in policy, you know, XYZ. That isn't going to be enough. Moving forward, you have to demonstrate that employees are aware of it, that they're actually doing it. They understand what they're learning. And again, to get people to really do that, you know, make some effort to have it be engaging and fun and interactive. And I think that'll work really well for you. Data mapping and classification, that's the one that I think is extremely difficult because it's happening and moving so quickly. The velocity with which data is being exchanged and with so many different parties is incredible. So that is a monumental task. We have a great team here that is working on that. We also use a tool, it's the OneTrust tool that is kind of a house for the data coming in and for data subject access requests. And that has actually worked really well for us as well. They have some integrations with other vendors that are out there. And so you might take a look at that as well in terms of resources, because I think scaling it out is incredibly important, right? That the manual processes are, it's just going to be too hard to keep them updated in this world. And so I think being able to create it and scale it, I think is critical from in the world that we're in now. And then finally, vendor due diligence. This one I cannot underscore enough. Again, a really important area for regulators, for the law. So to the extent that you're working with third parties, and most of us are, everything from staff aug to our cloud service providers, and then their fourth parties. So what we're finding is that, you know, we were really proactive. Several years ago, we started updating our vendor management processes and our technology databases and, you know, tracking what we were doing at the front end in terms of diligence, and then also kind of the back end for auditing, right, and prioritizing those vendors. But we also found out as we were doing that our vendors, they were properly vetted and they were doing great, but they're starting to use other parties, right? And so now there's this whole other layer where we have to be sure that, number one, we're contracting with those third parties to say, if you're going to do that, you have to, you know, give us consent, or we have to know that you're binding those other third parties to the same requirements and restrictions. And that's going to be really critical, again, I think from an audit standpoint, from a regulator standpoint. So those are the big ones. There are some kind of sub points that fall within this, but this gives you a high level idea of at least what our priorities have been for 21 and where we're, you know, heading into the next year. And that's it. This is, I guess I'll bring up Safety SAM again. At the end of our Safety SAM program, our training modules, there's a section where he says, we've covered a lot, let's review. And that is a kind of slogan or tagline that we kind of tease one another about around here. And when we wrap up meetings, sometimes we say it and everybody knows what that means. So we were struggling to find something similar for Pam, and we just made it very simple to say, please make protecting privacy a priority. So she says this at the end of her trainings, and that's how we're going to wrap this particular session now. So I will stop talking. And Andrea, if you have any questions, I have no idea where we are on time, but I'll just open it up for questions. And again, I want to thank you for the time and for the forum here today. It was really fun.
You are doing perfect on time, and thank you for the overview. Really appreciate it. I have questions, but I also know that our audience is typically not shy about asking questions. Everybody here, Michelle probably should have prefaced this. This is the compliance committee, so all of us wear different hats, but somehow in the sphere of compliance, clearly we all know that privacy is an emerging topic. So I'll leave room to other people to ask questions. And if not, I'm ready to jump in because I have a few. So audience, any questions? Unmute yourself and go ahead. Well, while we wait for somebody to find the courage, Michelle, if you don't mind, not everybody has the luxury of having a chief privacy officer. And just from your last slide, it feels like there's a lot going on, right? So if you are either a smaller auction or if you are somebody at a bank that is dealing with a portfolio that needs to be remarketed, and clearly privacy is not your, day in, day out, right? You're trying to convert assets into cash. What's a good place to start if you're one or the other? And what is it that you can do by yourself before you even pick up the phone and call the lawyers on the line?
I think that's a great question and a great point. And even with the bigger organizations, there is some discussion about where that role properly lives, right? Is it legal? Is it security? Is it HR? And some companies are doing it differently. I think that as long as there's someone that is engaged by it and understands the field, right, and understands where the data is coming in. So like even on the lot, we're used to creating policies around what happens if you find mail in there, you find like a passport or driver's license or something. And now all of our, inspectors and technicians and everybody are learning what this vehicle is now, right? The newer models, they work in different ways. There's a lot of information in there, whether it's, the garage door code or it's the phone has been synced to the car. And so all the contacts are coming up. So I think if there's someone that, loves the space and understands the technology, having that person just be the relationship point of person to understand they understand the business, they understand where it's flowing, and then making those relationships with the people on the ground so that we refer to those folks many times as privacy champions. So if you can put that task force together and say, these are our privacy champions, and they're going to come to me when something comes up. And if I need to go to legal, I'll go to legal. But I think it's a really important point because even if you have as a dealership, let's say, people, I think in our industry even argue about, well, we do about not argue in good faith, but we have discussions about who owns the data and where it stops and starts. And I think it's a little bit unsettled, but kind of wearing my legal hat, what's clear to me from having, practiced law for so long is that, the paper doesn't refuse the ink. If a lawyer can bring a lawsuit, they'll bring the lawsuit, and they're not just going to say, well, the car came into the dealership, so it's on the dealership. And then when it got to the auction house, that's really between the buyer and the seller. The auction house was just in the middle. I mean, they're going to name everybody, right? So it doesn't really matter whose lot it's on. If the car is leaving the lot with personal information in it and something bad happens, everybody has to get lined up and figure out what those respective liabilities are. So I think that the risk is pretty broad. There are differing levels of risk depending on who did what, and as they touch the data. But I do think that the risk is broad enough to encapsulate everyone, no matter how big or small, because at the end of the day, the policy is to protect the consumer, right? The actual consumer whose data elements are being shared or used in a bad way.
And Michelle, tell us a little bit more about Privacy Pam. Is the program actually done and being rolled out, at least internally? And what are the aspirations of the program?
Right. So we have started this as kind of a 4-quarter module training, so annual training, but in 4 pieces. And we got approval to do it starting this year. So we have completed 2. There are 4 topics. The first one is the distinction between privacy and data security. So that's the focus or the theme of the first training. That's complete. The second one is personal information in the vehicle. What do we need to know about data that's flowing through that vehicle? So the second training is really critical for our industry because it's focused just on, vehicle remarketing and the vehicle itself. That is also complete. We are near completion on Q3. We're a little behind. We had some resource changes and some other COVID challenges. And so we're a little behind on Q3, but that's focused on international privacy. So we bring in a lot more of GDPR and Canada's Privacy Act and basically the international focus on that. And then the last one is actually mobile privacy. We're at script stage on that one, but that is actually dealing with mobile devices and, not just phones, but also just any device that is on the go. So it's called privacy on the go. And we should have that one completed by the end of the year.
So you're already rolling this out among car employees?
Correct. Yep. We've already had the first 2 trainings and those are complete. And that is required training for car employees.
Okay. And Safety Sam clearly had an incredible blueprint, right, that left behind, because I think it started as an internal program just for car, then there was a partnership with NAAA, and now it has become just everybody knows who Safety Sam is, right? So do you have similar aspiration for Privacy Pam, and what's coming next for Pam?
Yeah, I think that's a natural development or evolution of the program. What's exciting about that is that it actually translates to any industry, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be just the vehicle remarketing industry. And so I think we'd like to be as helpful as we can and get it out there. And it's certainly packaged in a way that is very easily shared and can be, used by anyone really. So I think we want to get the next final modules completed. And I think we'll be looking at that maybe even as soon as next year.
Who's the audience for it? Is it auctions like for Safety Sam or is it different?
Oh, I think it could be anyone. I mean, it truly is a broad-based study of privacy and, the laws and regulations in this space. We customize it really for the vehicle remarketing industry. It certainly is, relevant to buyers, sellers, consignors. I mean, everybody in our industry, I think, but beyond, I would say beyond as well. I think it would translate to other industries as well.
Has anybody from the audience found any courage to jump in? I see that Scott has unmuted himself.
I raised my hand.
Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I did raise my hand, but you can go first. Go ahead.
Go ahead. You follow the right process and raised your hand. I'll wait.
Not if you didn't recognize it. So really quick. Hi, ladies. Thank you for being on this call. This is great. Now we are a consignor, a bank consignor that deals only with repossessions, where I see a lot of the overreaching and where we need to reach out to is not necessarily so much. It's about at the auction and when we were marketing the vehicles. It's back at the repo agent spot where a lot of now we're finding, are there repo agents on this call? I hope not, repo people. So what we are finding even more and more now, and especially with the RVs, but even with vehicles is where, we got a state regulation, but you know what, we're not going to clean it out because we don't want to touch it. It's a mess, especially on the motorhome. So they just ship it to the auction. And now they're leaving any potential personal property and so forth of the customer. We're getting a lot of burns being left in the RVs and so forth. And it's happening even more and more. But I see a lot of this privacy stuff over, reaching back to where it's originating from. How is that personal property getting to the auction? And that's the pain point I know for me, because we only do repossessions, is how do we stop it from there? Because now it's dumped on the auctions and such to have to even deal with it. Are there any thoughts or ideas regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a great point, Jeannie. And I think, I remember when we had to kind of work through this process, even with the personal, like the tangible personal property, because technically the repo agents, it shouldn't show up at the auction, right, with the stuff in the car, but it does. So we have to figure out what do we do and what is the process there. And we work with our customers to figure that out. I think in some cases it'll depend. I don't know if the repo agent always has access to the vehicle, if the vehicle can even be turned on, right? So some of the risk where you see it within the vehicle itself is, if the car is on and you can see the personal context of the GPS code, et cetera. So I know we have new technologies with some of the models where there are like cameras outside the car even. So I think some of that is technology dependent. And I probably don't have a great answer for you other than I think we all need to work together on documenting what those processes are and then enforcing them where we can as they're happening, right? So, and again, in a way that like even the repo agents can understand, right? There's a lot of like intense, complex legal, regulatory stuff that is, makes my head hurt sometimes. So I think for, everybody that we have to kind of drill down to the basics and make sure that there's a practical way to approach it.
And I can sort of speak to that too. It's Jesse from PAR. So we are a forwarder, right? So we've got a big network of repo agents. And I think that the key is that we're just compensating the repo agents appropriately for that personal property, because especially with the RVs, I mean, if they have to remove inventory and store an entire home's worth of stuff, obviously they need to be compensated more than they would just for a standard vehicle. So I think that's a lot of what the agents are struggling with right now, because personal property fees have either been completely eliminated across the industry or reduced. So they're definitely facing some high costs there.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. I'm Scott Hilson. I was going to jump in and save you as a colleague. I'm the Chief Privacy Officer of Cox Automotive. And so I imagine we have a lot of similarities. So thank you for giving your presentation. It was real helpful. One thing I wanted to kind of point out is, in addition to personal information we find in the cars that are delivered, we're dealing with a lot of personal information that we get from banks, either on redemptions. There's a lot more products, and Michelle, and I see Elizabeth Murphy is on too. You probably are experiencing kind of where the auctions businesses are stepping into retail and touching consumers more often. And from that, we get personal information in the way our retail businesses might. So building out CCPA processes around the auction is new, and it really hasn't been something that I think our industry has had to do yet. So just wanted to kind of highlight, not a question, but just want to highlight that that's also a really changing landscape, in addition to California, where all of our B2B personal information now is going to be subject. So thanks for everything you do, and it's good meeting you online.
Thank you. Great to meet you, and I'm glad to have another voice that I can call as a sounding board.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, and I think you made a great point too about CCPA. Initially when some of this came out, I think companies were sort of looking at it and saying, well, are we in California? Do we qualify? Do we have to follow it? And what we're seeing is it's too cumbersome and too expensive not to do it, in a harmonized way, right? So you don't want to sort of react to every state that comes out with the next level restriction and the next level regulation. It's just too much. So to the extent that we can pull together as an industry and say, here are the basics in terms of fair information principles, and we know that, California is going to lead the way and be the most restrictive, and maybe someday we'll have this federal legislation that will harmonize things. But until then, I think we're taking sort of a almost conservative approach to say, we've got GDPR, we have CCPA, that covers kind of most of the gamut. So let's just build our processes and our documents and policies around that.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I have one more. Okay. So actually, before we go into the questions, I want to tell everybody that Michelle will be speaking at Used Car Week on Wednesday, the 17th at 2 p.m. The rest of the panel is actually an entire 100% ARA panel, because there's going to be myself and Bob Sullivan, and we're also going to have our former president, Paul Seeger, speaking there. So it's a great chance for the people who will be attending Used Car Week to hear the perspectives of technology players, auctions, consignors. Everybody will get to shed light on how they see privacy from their own perspective. And then, Michelle, one last question. If you had one single little bit of advice on, what is it that companies can do tomorrow morning, what would it be?
Sorry, I missed that question. You froze on my end. I don't know if you froze for others, but I missed you.
Yeah, it froze on my end as well.
Oh, I apologize. Well, I was saying if you had one piece of advice on what can people do on the first week of November so that they'll feel a lot better on January 1st, what is that?
Start mapping your data. Find out where your data lives and start understanding how it moves through your ecosystem. And because we always say what we can measure, we can manage, right? So that's where I would start, I think.
I think it's a fantastic piece of advice. Well, everybody, thank you for attending, especially Michelle, Crystal, thank you very much for making this compliance call here. I will post the recording on the IARA website as I always do. So I'll send you a link on YouTube first and then we'll get it published. So for those of you who missed it today, or you have friends or colleagues that you think could benefit from hearing from Michelle, you can always watch it later on. With that, you guys have a fantastic November and I'll see you soon, hopefully a used car week.